In my world, I have it so that zombies transfer the infection via fluid transfer. So this is basically, if you're infected, your spit, your blood, any other fluids that you might have, not necessarily being ingested, but like coming in contact with another person. So like if you have a wound and then a zombie bleeds on it, then you will get infected. And then eventually you die, you raise as a zombie. But what I wanted it to be is I wanted it to be less of like a, oh no, there's no hope, blah, blah, blah. And more like a, nah, there's like a decent percentage of people who are asymptomatic carriers. There's also a decent percent of people, less so, who are just immune. And they're not special, they're not like unique, they're not 1 out of a million. 15% of people who get infected are asymptomatic carriers, and like 5% of people who get infected or who are exposed to it are actually just immune. So like 80% of people are still going to get infected, but more like a real disease. There are some people who are just immune. There are some people who are asymptomatic carriers. No, literally, no, like Slowboy, you're catching on. That is an intentional part of it, is that there are STI zombies. There are blood transfer zombies. There are people who infected potentially dozens of people without ever knowing because they were an asymptomatic carrier and they got like sloppy drunk and like made out with someone. And then that caused a zombie to form because of saliva transfer. And then that person went on to infect a bunch of people. No, and that's the thing, is that it's like, what happens if you're an asymptomatic carrier? You already got infected. Now you are a walking biohazard. And the only people you are safe with are other asymptomatic carriers and people who are immune. And further, I also wanted it to be that there are different stages to the infection with deteriorating levels of intelligence. So in the first like hours of infection, you're basically really dumb, but you still have your frontal lobe functional. You have limited cognitive functionality, but you can still do stuff like use a gun, climb a ladder, unlock a door. Probably not drive if you just got infected. You have severely reduced cognitive functions and are infective. Other infected will not be aggressive towards you. And basically, you can like make plans. You can be like, there are survivors in there. I want to infect the survivors. There is a skylight above them. I'm going to climb on the roof, open the skylight, and then drop down on them from the roof. But that's like within hours of infection. And basically within like 12 hours of infection, that's gone. And then suddenly you have like, you're kind of normal infected. Like 12 to 24 hours is generally when full cognitive deterioration sets in. And then you just become instinctual. And then after that point, once you start getting decomposed, and like once decomposition actually starts setting in, then suddenly you start relying less on your sight and more on your hearing and your smell. And then eventually you're decomposed to such a point where you are only relying on smell. At some point, it's entirely just reflex based on touch. So if you get infected, you'll start out at the point where you're making plans to lure out survivors, to then ambush them using tools and interacting with humanity and like tool use and human structures. And then you degrade to the point where you're just a mindless wandering shambling zombie. And then you kind of start decomposing. You start deteriorating. You become less reliant on sight and more relying on just hearing, smell, touch. And then eventually you fully revert into, you're probably crawling around at that point. You're probably lying in a spot, not moving much to conserve your energy, where you're only smelling things. If someone moves in front of you, but they are covered in like zombie guts, which remember, zombie guts are infective, you will not care because you can't smell them and you can't see, you can't hear. You're so degraded mentally that you can't react to stimuli effectively. And then it's at a point where you are just completely immobile. And then the only cognizance or reactivity you have is muscle reflexes. If something touches you, you will grab it and bite. And that is the extent of how you interact. And this is after like months of infection because you're so deteriorated by that point. And then you just die again, where you're at a point where you no longer have the caloric intake and the energy to even do that. So you just cease. You just become a corpse, but you're still infective because your bodily fluids are infective. If I'm an asymptomatic infected, I just go into a supermarket and spit inside soda bottles. I like the idea of early infection zombies straight up being like normal humans except lower intelligence cannibals that actually have some time before they turn into outright identifiable zombies. Exactly. I'm not sure if I would want to play it as, oh, I'm evil now, or if I want to play it as like, I don't know what happened to me. I have this intense hunger, and for whatever reason, my buddy's looking real tasty right now. My buddy's an absolute snack, like a 3-course meal. Or if it would be like a tiger almost, or like a jaguar, where it's not that you're making plans in the sense of, I am a human that has agency. It's more in the plans of, I am hunting prey. My prey is doing X. The most efficient use of my energy is to do Y so that they do Z. Because that's like animalistic intelligence. Oh, like at first it would seem like there are a bunch of weird cannibal cults spreading in certain areas. Exactly. And then it becomes, oh my gosh, it's zombies. Very quickly the meta would develop, which... oh my gosh, the meta. The kind of strategies would develop of like, oh, avoid fluid transfer, avoid infected persons. The normal zombie myths would start cropping up, like go for the head kind of deal. As people figure that out, they would start being like, wait, these are not responding to like the visual signals that we have. They're only responding to sound and smell. And then some of them are only responding to smell. As the infection progresses, you would see an evolution of responses to it, and then all of this would be thrown on its head as soon as asymptomatic carriers are discovered. Because suddenly, we have the zombies figured out, we have no idea how to deal with someone who's an asymptomatic carrier. In my setting, there are basically like 2 time periods of zombies in my world. Because I have a setting where I have 3 eras. It is my fantasy setting, it is my superhero setting, and it is my near sci-fi setting. And all of these are the same world, just farther along on the timeline. So like it starts in a fantasy world, and then eventually it becomes like 20th century retro futurism in a superhero setting, and then it eventually evolves into near sci-fi. So I have 2 time periods where like in fantasy, there are zombies that are magic based, and then in sci-fi, there are zombies which are technology based, like a developed virus using magic as the base. They actually take the magic zombies and they basically synthesize a way to recreate that technologically. So in fantasy, it's really just, if you are a necromancer, you can raise a zombie. Generally, raising a corpse raises it as a walking corpse, which is literally just like a flesh puppet. It is oh, this is a dead person, I make them walk around, and they slam their arms into you and try to kill you. But there's also a zombie, which is your more traditional zombie, which is it can infect people. It can make other zombies. It is fluid transfer causes the infection. It has this kind of deteriorating tiers of intelligence. And obviously this is way more of a threat than just a walking corpse. Because it's more of your traditional media zombie. And the reason that there's no zombie outbreak in the fantasy setting is because there's magic everywhere. If someone's going to get infected with a zombie virus, they can just be taken out by one of the myriad of adventurers nearby, or they might be able to be healed by magic, which it's not a high magic setting, it's actually a very low magic setting, but that is an option you have. I'm sorry for going deep into my lore. Honestly, it would be even more insane if this early stage lasted a few months. See, that's the thing. I don't know how long I want the early stage to last. I don't think I want it to be months. I think that would be too busted. I think that'd be too long. I think that would kind of get in the way of zombies being zombies. I think that would make them too much of something else. I want them to have that core of the main thrust of a zombie apocalypse is that they are mindless undead chasing you, but I want that kind of spice, that intrigue, that interest of they start out intelligence and lose that intelligence. They lose that autonomy. They lose their senses even. A week to maybe a month? I don't know. I think maybe a week might be good. Although I think a week instead of healthy to dead to stage 1, maybe instead it's healthy to week 1, and then kind of like it's a slow degradation over that first week, and you slowly, almost like you start experiencing delusions, cravings. It's this kind of like Lovecraft, almost like someone mentioned Call of Cthulhu earlier. It's like the Lovecraftian madness awakening in you. Once you get infected, it takes like a week to set in, but over the course of that week, your intelligence is waning. You are experiencing these cravings and these urges and these kind of dark thoughts. And maybe undead, maybe zombies still attack you like 3 to 4 days in because you're not fully infected yet. But like after that week happens, then it's a very rapid degradation of like over the course of 12 hours, 24 hours, you go from kind of foggy out of it, experiencing cravings and delusions, to zombie. So like maybe it takes a week to set in, and over the course of that week, you're basically gaslighting yourself into becoming a zombie. You think this could easily cause really tense moments in a story where a character is, say, walking through a heavily infected city, covered in like deer piss or something, and being quiet because all the zombies are blind, and then a singular recently infected zombie turns and sees them, and want to know what that recently infected would do? It would start yelling. It would run towards the infected and start screaming because all of the zombies nearby are like noise, and it would go towards wherever the recently infected was going. Maybe the recently infected dies instantly. Maybe the survivor like stabs them silently or like shoots them or whatever. Suddenly they have every infected that is within screaming range that can hear coming after them. No, that's the thing, is that if a recently infected is screaming at you and like sprinting at you, at that point, there's no point not to fire a gun, right? Could be really interesting if it goes really long. So first the smart zombies take over and things stabilize until they realize they're slowly going stupid. Ooh, see, that would be good. Again, I think that's a little bit outside of what I'm looking for, because in my sci-fi setting, the way the zombie outbreak starts is that there are two nations, and I don't know if they're at war or one is just a belligerent or whatever, but basically one of them synthesizes the zombie virus and uses it as a bioweapon on the 3 largest military bases in the country, as well as the capital, to basically like hit their major political centers. My thought process is they get this one, they get this one, they get the capital, and by the time all of this happens, the third one wises up and manages to like shoot down the drones that are bringing it. So the infection still like lands, but the third base still stands. So the idea is that the singular nation is thrown into turmoil, and the zombies immediately get out of hand, backfire on the nation that infected it, start attacking surrounding nations. But even like the first hit nation still has like a major military base, still has major population centers that weren't hit, still has like economic and manufacturing hubs that have time to respond. It's not complete anarchy instantly. It is a like, yo, we need to evacuate, we need to fight this, we need to like do martial law. This nation has the development of the disease. They don't have a cure, so they can't just like cure it. However, they can respond. They know it's coming, so they can shore up their defenses, and maybe they lose some of their territory, but generally it's contained. This nation up here fought against it really hard, manages to push it back, and just does a full Stonewall quarantine of this entire border. So it's the idea of like, the zombies are a real threat that were planted to disrupt the government, but even then they're not like, they didn't take over the world. The world isn't ended. It is this one nation is irrevocably damaged. This nation is reeling but going to survive, and this nation immediately quarantined it. The story that I have in mind that I want to write for this, and I started writing like the first chapter like years ago, and then I started working on different projects, and now I'm doing YouTube, so I have no time for it, is someone in this nation, like a scientist in this nation, basically develops an inoculation. Not a cure, an inoculation, so like a vaccine. So if you vaccinate yourself with it, you become immune to the infection. The goal is to get the vaccine to one of the other nations so that they can distribute it. because this nation does not have the facilities or the industry remaining, or the infrastructure remaining to distribute that. And then the entire story follows this vaccine and its journey from like the heart of the infection, probably like on this military base. I was actually thinking of a separate location, but the military base might be a good spot for it. Cross country, cross the border to this nation so that it can be developed into a vaccine and distributed everywhere. Because at this point, it's not a political threat, it is a humanitarian threat. And the goal of this story, and I'm not sure if I want to write this, I think this would make a really fun video game. So I might, this might actually, if I have the time at some point, I would love to make like a visual novel of this where the goal is you follow the vaccine, not any characters. So it's a story of people who find this vaccine and they start bringing it to this other nation. And then inevitably, it's a zombie apocalypse, they die. So then new people have to pick up the vaccine, read what it's about, and then continue the journey, and then die. And then new people find it, and then these people trade it off for like parts or whatever, because they don't care, because not everyone wants to save the world. A lot of people just want to survive. And then these new people who picked it up continue the mission, and then they die. And it's a story of how great things are seldom the byproduct of a single person's work. It is almost always many people who don't even know each other, one giant chain working together, and the whole goal would be to annihilate your heart slowly. Oh, and large problems, it also needs to be moved through an active war zone because the nation didn't make peace. No, exactly. And like this nation is still trying to capitalize on it. They're still trying to like move into the territory of the nation that they like warfared. This nation is just full embargo and quarantine and not letting anyone in or out, and you just have to hope one person doesn't use it on themselves so nobody can have it. And yeah, and that would be the thing, is that it's like, this is a minor spoiler, but like it's also, when am I going to get the chance to do this, so I might as well just talk about it. The main driving thing of it would not just be that it is a vaccine, so it's like a box that has like a vaccine in it, and it also has a data slate written, or like a piece of paper written, that's just like, hey, I'm the doctor who made this, here's what this is, here's where it needs to go, please do this for the good of all. This is bigger than all of us, this is a humanitarian issue, you can save the world by doing this. Oh yeah, stuff like railroads are damaged, like, I mean, they were at war, so the entire like eastern front would be damaged, and maybe even the northern front would be damaged, because maybe it's a three-way war, and then the northern nation, instead of capitalizing on the zombies, wants to let the wildfire burn itself out. Wants to let the zombies just burn themselves out. And is going to deal with that problem later. But they're happy to give humanitarian aid because they recognize the existential threat that the zombies pose. Meanwhile, the nation that caused the zombie outbreak wants to capitalize on the zombie outbreak, despite the fact that they're also dealing with zombies. It's got this note in it. The doctor is just like, hey, here's what this is. Good luck, have fun. Right? Yeah, bikes and bows. Absolutely would. Oh, because like you bike up, you park your bike, you use a bow and arrow, or even like a sling. Like slings would be much easier to maintain than a bow. And so long as you know how to use it, you can like crush a skull with a sling pellet. Yeah, and absolutely, there would be political repercussions for more than just zombies, because they used a bioweapon in warfare. And it's not that the world suddenly ended because zombies got introduced, it was this one nation got thrown into chaos and is barely surviving. Meanwhile, the rest of the nations of the world are maybe sending humanitarian aid, maybe doing airstrikes on population centers to take out zombies, but fundamentally, it's much like how in the real world, there are active atrocities going on in the world that have not shaped geopolitics, unfortunately. This would just be a footnote in history to most people in other countries. The idea would be that the vaccine has a note, and she's like, hey, here's a vaccine. This is humanitarian aid. Get this to, ideally, my cohort in this nation. But any scientist, like any virologist will do. The different nations also probably want the vaccine first. Yeah, exactly. So if word gets out that there's a vaccine, there's going to be like, hey, we will send people in to just like helicopter you out if you give us the vaccine. And then they're probably like, that sounds amazing. And then inevitably it's, no, they want to use it for nefarious purposes. They want to monetize it. It's probably not even a nation that does that. It's probably like a pharma company from one of those foreign nations that hears about that. It's like, hey, we will buy a helicopter to fly you out of there if you bring it to our headquarters, so that we can then charge like $10,000 per vial per dose.